This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some problem pools that you may run into. Specifically, I'm going to cover those pools that just don't seem to clear up. Whatever you're doing, it's just not working, and the pool just is not getting clear and blue, and it's a really frustrating situation when you run into this. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. So I've been there and I've had pools that for some reason I just can't get a handle on. And this is something that's really frustrating. Now there are things you can do, of course, and I'll cover some things you can do to eventually get a handle on the pool. But I think initially it's really frustrating when you can't get to the bottom of the problem. And there are many variables that could cause the pool to look cloudy, look kind of murky, just not really be clear. Of course, the customer notices it as well in most cases. And so there's some added pressure. You know, you're a professional, you have this account, and it's just not turning around or not looking good. So there are a lot of factors again. So I'll go over some things that I've run into over the years that have caused this problem. And I'll start with the filtration system. I know it sounds really basic and something that's obvious. If the filter is not working correctly, the pool's not going to look good. But you may have looked at the filter and everything looks fine. A lot of times with the sand filter, it just takes a lot longer for the pool to clear up. Sometimes using a flocculant or a pool flock or aluminum sulfate will really help clump up the whatever's in the water, and this helps clear it up. So the first step with a sand filter, if you have a sand filter and it's not clearing up, I would suggest putting in a flocculant so that everything kind of clumps together and drops to the bottom. Really easy to use. There's different ones out there. There's liquid and there's also a powdered form. And with the sand filter, typically there's a vacuum the waste mode, which is good because then you can vacuum it all out of the pool. And sometimes that's all you need to do with the sand filter is make it more efficient by adding that flock in there so that everything clumps together. Because sand filters only actually work to about 40 microns, which isn't great. It's not the best filtration system out there. So when the pool does turn, you have algae or it gets cloudy, it does take longer for that sand filter to actually work and be effective. Another thing you can do at the filter, if you have a cartridge filter, and this may sound counterproductive, but it actually is smart to do. But if you have a cartridge filter and you notice that the pool is just not clearing up, you changing the cartridge filters, you may think, well, I'm going to change the cartridge filter. The pool doesn't look that great. All this stuff's going to ruin the new cartridge. When in fact, it's not really going to do that because the new cartridge is new. So I guess that's logical. But another thing with the new cartridge filter is that the pores are not clogged up. And so the problem you're probably having with the old cartridge filter, even though it looks like you're cleaning it and it's coming clean, the material is basically paper. And over time, it just wears down and you can't really get that kind of cleanliness that you would get with a new cartridge. And so it makes some sense to, if the pool is cloudy or kind of murky and maybe greenish still, change those cartridges. You'll be surprised that just doing that simple thing will help turn that pool around. And with the D filter, I found that sometimes just changing all 8 grids is something that solves the problem. Again, it's kind of the same concept. The grid material is kind of a fiber, and you can see that when you're cleaning it, sometimes it just comes out kind of yellowish or comes out with some kind of dirt stains on there still. And changing all the grids out, sometimes it's just enough to get that pool back to where it needs to be. So I usually get a whole grid assembly with a new top manifold and the grids themselves, and I find that to be much more effective than just changing the grids out, because typically the manifold is old anyway, and so it's easier too, by the way, just to buy the whole grid assembly. You just look for it, whatever filter, if it's an FNS Plus or Hayward or a Jandy filter, go to your supplier and order the grid assembly. It comes with the bottom manifold, top manifold, all the grids already set, and you just pull the old one out, throw it away, put the new one in, and you're set to go. And sometimes that's all you need to do, and the pool will turn around pretty rapidly. That's one of the first things I look at when I get to a pool and it's just not turning around. I just think the filter elements are really crucial. With a sand filter, do you need to change the sand out? Well, I mean, you could change the sand if it gets to that point. I think flocking it first to see if you can vacuum everything out the waste would be the first step. And then secondary would be a change of the sand in the filter if necessary. Just depends on how long it's been since the sand was changed. And I'm of the opinion that you don't really need to do that unless it's something that can't be turned around by flocking the pool. And the sand filter, again, just is not efficient to begin with. Another thing to look at is the cyanuric acid level in the pool. Everyone knows that high cyanuric acid levels are a problem because the chlorine is less effective at an elevated level. So I would run a cyanuric acid test. I do this, of course, when I take over a new account, especially one that just is not working correctly and I just can't get things balanced and it's just ugly, basically. And the cyanuric acid test most only go to about 100, or I should say that most are only accurate to 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, but the pool may be at 200 parts per million. So a way to do this, of course, is with a dilution test where you take bottled water and then you take the pool water, mix half and half, do the test again, and then you just double that number. So if it's coming back at 80, then you know it's 160 because you only had half pool water. Sometimes you have to actually do 1/4. You have to really do the other math because there's so much cyanuric acid, it doesn't work. Now there are test strips. I think it's Lamont that has the ones that go up to 500 parts per million. Test strips are pretty good because they tend to give you a cyanuric acid reading higher than you would do with the turbidity test. And I think it's not a bad idea to dip a test strip in there, especially a high cyanuric acid test strip that can read up to 500 parts per million. And you get an idea that, hey, this pool has a ton of cyanuric acid in it. And I did quickly look it up because I wanted to make sure that it was Lamont. They do have it. It's called the InstaTest Cyanuric Acid Test Strip. Its order code is 3007. So this strip will test from 40 to 100 to 150, 250, and 500 parts per million. So definitely a good product to have on your truck because this will save you from doing a dilution test. And really, those cyanuric acid dilution tests aren't that accurate either. So this test strip will definitely let you know if the pool has like 250 parts per million of cyanuric acid in there. And then what are your options? Well, I mean, the best option, and this is something that you have to talk to the customer. I recently did a podcast on draining the pool down, had to talk to the customer. I think at least draining half the pool water down is a start in the right direction in this case. If you're at 300 parts per million, you drain half the water, you're at 150 parts per million. You could probably manage the pool at 150 or 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid. It's hard to manage it when it's at 250 or 300, especially when you're having problems. Now, if the pool has that much cyanuric acid in it, and there really isn't a problem to begin with, you could probably manage it by just keeping a really high free chlorine level in the pool. Once it starts getting algae and it starts turning on you, then you have all kinds of problems because the chlorine's not as effective, and then the filter is getting algae in it. So it's one of those things where it's like a vicious cycle. High cyanuric acid, when the pool starts to turn, then you have the problem with the filter getting algae in it. The filter's not effective or efficient, and then it kind of snowballs out of control. And that's why a lot of times homeowners taking care of their pool just can't get a handle on it because they're just throwing money at at the pool. Tons of chlorine in there, algicides, and it's still not turning around for the customer. So that's something that you can do in that situation, is a partial drain. And then going forward, I would, of course, just use liquid chlorine or cal hypo so that you're not adding a stabilized chlorine in there. And you may have to add a larger amount of that to be effective. Again, if you're using Bob Lowry's formula of 7.5% of free chlorine to cyanuric acid, if the pool's at 100 parts per million, you're going to need 8 parts per million of free chlorine, which means you're going to have to keep an elevated chlorine level and use a lot of liquid chlorine and cal hypo. Sometimes you're going to have to charge the customer for a 50-pound bucket of cal hypo, leave it at the stop, and use that to supplement any kind of maintenance dose of chlorine you're putting in, because you really can't manage a pool with that cyanuric acid level without using tablets, which would add more cyanuric acid to the water. So you're going to have to charge the customer for the extra chemicals. But that's another problem you run into, is a pool with really high cyanuric acid levels that has turned. You get a call, you go over there, and you're trying to turn the pool around, and you're going to have a lot of difficulty turning that pool around without doing a full or partial drain. That's just the reality of it. It's going to be a struggle because of the elevated cyanuric acid level. The fact that the pool has algae and is turned on you is going to be a real battle to get that pool back in shape. Here's one that's pretty obvious, but it really may not be obvious to you if you never had this problem. But if you have a pool that has a really bad surface, this is something where maybe there's a lot of scaling or there's etching in the plaster from not having the pH adjusted right, maybe too low of a pH, and then the plaster's etched, or the plaster's old with chips in it. I find that these pools are a struggle to maintain. It's really weird, but I had this pool. It was a really old pool, and the surface was just kind of weird. I don't know exactly who built this pool, but it had this weird surface and it had patches on it. So I knew right away that there was a problem with this pool surface. Someone had patched it a while ago, and it really had a problem because algae, especially black algae, would get into the cracks and pores of this pool, and it would make it really difficult for me to maintain this pool. Of course, I did the black algae treatment. The pool was fine for a long time, and then all of a sudden the black algae would come back, and the pool would turn pretty quickly if they used the pool. And this was a big problem because I just could never get this pool back in shape. And I finally realized that surface was the problem. The porous surface, algae would get in there and grow and just would not stay algae-free and clean. And this is a problem. You really can't maintain a pool that has a really bad surface. It's going to have problems. I think black algae would be the number one thing you're going to deal with. Algae getting into the cracks also is a problem. Another problem that I had with some of these pools that had really bad plasters, that when you brush them, they would have some dust come up, and then this would clog the filter as well. And so at that point, if you're brushing the pool, I'm not talking about a fiberglass pool, by the way. I'll touch on this briefly in a second. But a regular plastic pool with chips and cracks in it, it just starts to deteriorate to the point where you're actually getting some plaster dust every week, and the filter is getting all this white dust in there, making the pool work harder. So definitely a problem, and it's time to resurface the pool. Now, a lot of fiberglass pools that are built in, these aren't the ones that are dropped in on a crane in the backyard, but they're actually built in and they're sprayed. The fiberglass glaze is sprayed on there, something that happens over time. And these are very similar to a regular pool. They do everything is in ground, they have coping. But what happens is that it starts to wear down, and as you're brushing these fiberglass pools, you're going to get like a plume of white dust everywhere. And, sometimes you may think, well, what's all this white stuff? Is the pool painted? Well, no, it's the fiberglass, the glaze coming off of the fiberglass, and it just has to be redone. And this is a big problem. If you have a fiberglass pool and you brush it and all this white stuff comes off the sides, you're going to have nothing but problems, because all that goes into the filter, and that clogs the filter as well, making it very difficult. And then algae will start developing. So if this is something you run into, that fiberglass pool has to be redone at that point, and you're going to have a hard time maintaining that account. Another problem that you may run into in your area, it's kind of area dependent, but if you have a pool that normally is great, and I've had this happen to me a couple times already, I have a pool that's great, never have a problem with it, then all of a sudden I'm realizing that the chlorine's not holding in this pool. Now, of course, I do a leak detection test to make sure that, hey, is this thing leaking water? Because a leak will cause very similar problems where the chlorine's not holding, but then you would notice the cyanuric acid dropping, you would notice the pH rising, and the alkalinity kind of rising as well because fresh water is being added, more fresh water is being added with the autofill than normal. And so a leak definitely will cause a problem. So check the pool for a leak if you notice that the chlorine is not holding in there. But if there is a leak and you can do a bucket test, and I have a video on the bucket test, basically you get a 5-gallon bucket, I put a rock in there to hold it on the first step, fill it with water so it's equal to the pool water line, turn off the autofill, and put a piece of electrical tape in there. And inside the bucket, the water should be dropping down at the same rate as outside the bucket. It's kind of hard to explain on a podcast, but you can look it up, you can Google it, and you'll see the bucket test. But check for a leak, of course. That's the first thing I usually do when I notice that the chlorine's not holding in the pool, especially if the pool was perfectly fine before, and I know the filtration system is good, and everything else is good. But if that's not the case, something that happens, and this is something that is kind of a death sentence to the water of that pool, is if nitrates get in the pool. And this is something that you probably should check for. They do have nitrate test strips, and so I would have those on my truck. But if nitrates get in the water, for any reason they get into the pool, that's kind of a death sentence to the water because nothing is going to hold, no chlorine is going to hold in the pool. Now you can break nitrates. I've done this before. I kind of did it just as an experiment because I wanted to do it because Bob Lowry said that, you can break it. So I was like, well, I can try to break it. But he said if you break it, it doesn't matter because the nitrates are still going to be a problem in there and you have to drain it eventually. But I wanted to break it anyway to see if I can do it. So what I did with this pool is that I filled up the floater with tablets. I think I put 5 tablets in there. And then I put about 10 gallons of liquid chlorine in the pool. This is something I was experimenting with, so bear with me. Then I went back the next day and I did another 10 gallons and I put more tablets in there. And actually, I did break the nitrates. The pool was holding chlorine at that point. Of course, I put a boatload of chlorine in to break it, and the pool started recovering. But just as Bob Lowry said, like a month or 2 later, the chlorine stopped holding, and it was the same battle again, and so that pool had to be drained. So nitrates are definitely a problem, and how they get in the pool is various ways they would get into the pool. A lot of it has to do, I think, with fertilizer in the area, and the wind blowing, and it getting into the pool. I found that to be the problem. So if you get to a pool and you have a pool that's normally good, but then you notice the chlorine is just not holding, you're putting a ton of chlorine in, by the way. So this is another side of nitrates, is that not only was the pool holding chlorine well and it was in good shape, but then algae is forming and you're putting a ton of chlorine in the pool. This will indicate that there is something seriously wrong with the water, and nitrates are definitely one of the things that you want to test for at that point. And typically, draining the pool is the only way to get rid of it and to kind of cure that problem. It's a catastrophic problem, I know, and it's something to be aware of. I'm running out of time here, and I still have quite a few things to cover as far as things that will cause the pool to not get back to normal and you're having a struggle with it. So let me continue that in another part here, and I'll talk about more issues a pool can have to where you just can't get a handle on it and get it back to the way it used to be, or get it blue when you take over a new account. If you're looking for podcasts that I have, you can, of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and these podcasts go up Monday through Friday there. Subscribe to the podcast as well. And if you're looking for episodes, go to my website, swimmingprolearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu of other podcasts for you there that you can go to and listen to. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.